Dreams? If only they had been. But I don't need dreams, Doctor. That's why I hardly have them, because I have this life instead. With me it all happens in broad daylight. The disproportionate and the melodramatic, this is my daily bread. The coincidences of dreams, the symbols, the terrifyingly laughable situations, the oddly ominous banalities, the accidents and humiliations, the bizarrely appropriate strokes of luck or misfortune that other people experience with their eyes shut, I get with mine open. Who else do you know whose mother actually threatened him with a dreaded knife? Who else was so lucky as to have the threat of castration so straightforwardly put by his mamma? Who else, on top of this mother, had a testicle that wouldn't descend? A nut that had to be coaxed and coddled, persuaded, drugged, to get it to come down and live in the scrotum like a man? Who else do you know broke a leg chasing shixies? Or came in his eye first time out? Or found a real live monkey right in the streets of New York? A girl with a passion for the banana? Doctor, maybe other patients dream. With me, everything happens. I have a life without latent content. The dream thing happens. Doctor, I couldn't get it up in the state of Israel. How's that for symbolism, Bubby? Let's see somebody beat that for acting out. Could not maintain an erection in the promised land. At least not when I needed it, not when I wanted it, not when there was something more desirable than my own hand to stick it into. But as it turns out, you can't stick tapioca pudding into anything. Tapioca pudding I am offering this girl. Wet sponge cake, a thimbleful of something melted, and all the while that self-assured little lieutenant so proudly flying those Israeli tits, prepared to be mounted by some tank commander. An excerpt there from near the end of Portnoy's Complaint by Philip Roth. As you can probably tell from that excerpt, going forward, if you are squeamish or don't want to hear excerpts and explication on a book that is completely transparently explicit, then this review might not be for you, because this book is crude, it's crass, it is unapologetically vulgar and Freudianly transparent. But it is absolutely fantastic and genuinely, and this is something I rarely say about books, there's probably on thinking about it very quickly, there's probably two others, Suttree and all the work of William Gaddis, that have actually made me laugh out loud, and I can now safely say that Portnoy's Complaint easily falls into the camp of books that genuinely will make you laugh out loud. It was published in 1969 by Philip Roth. It is now probably his most well-known work, and in 69 when it was published, it shot him into fame and in a way infamy, both because it is very good, but also because of its controversial nature regarding basically masturbation and sex. It is a novel of masturbation, it is a novel of sex, and it is a novel subtly of incest, but it tells it's a humorous monologue, basically, on the couch, we could say on the psychoanalyst's couch, of a lust-ridden, mother-addicted young Jewish bachelor called Alexander Portnoy, who we are really listening to his confession in that intimate, shameful, guilt-ridden detail of the therapy room, of the psychoanalyst's couch, basically. So we're allowed entry into a place where such abusive, crass, and plain-spoken language is obviously going to be the case. So the book actually opens right on the first page with a made-up complaint that's sort of adjacent to the idea of a lover, the idea of a lover's complaint that one might see in therapy and also in fiction. But it's called Portnoy's Complaint, after Alexander Portnoy, the protagonist of this novel. A disorder in which strongly felt ethical and altruistic impulses are perpetually warring with extreme sexual longings, often of a perverse nature. Spielvogel, that is Portnoy's psychoanalyst, says, acts of exhibitionism, voyeurism, fetishism, autoeroticism, and oral coitus are plentiful as a consequence of the patient's morality. However, neither fantasy nor act issues in genuine sexual gratification, but rather in overriding feelings of shame and the dread of retribution, particularly in the form of castration. It is believed by Spielvogel that many of the symptoms can be traced to the bonds obtaining in the mother-child relationship. Though it is both, in a sense, metafictionally, with this very short little metafictional Portnoy's complaint sort of placed in a fictional journal of psychoanalysis. It's so Freudianly sort of transparent in that sense. Also in the book, Freud's mentioned completely. They know what's going on, basically. And Roth is also unapologetic about, what do you do with this sort of Freudian Oedipal idea when it's no longer unconscious, when it's completely on the surface. And we're allowed entry to what we could say is the id. At one point, Portnoy, one of the great quotes from the book, says, "Enough being a nice Jewish boy, let's put the id back in yid." What happens really when the id is brought to the surface in an unapologetic manner and discussed with the psychoanalyst in the vessel that is Alexander Portnoy as this sex-obsessed, lust-filled man. Now, I will go into the plot. So basically, it's set in New Jersey from the 40s to the 60s. I've already described Portnoy, Oedipal, basically addicted to masturbation, weaving between dialogues and narratives of masturbation and then back to wanting to appease his mother, wanting to please society, and struggling with the guilt of not really living up to the Jewish nuclear family superego that is expected of him, we could say. And basically the narration just goes through scenes and stages and phases of this young man's boyhood, adolescence, and adulthood, with basically every single recollection touching upon his main dilemma, which is his inability to ever really enjoy ejaculation, enjoy any of the fruits of his sexual adventures, which are fruitful, we could say, fruitful in the sense that they're plentiful. And he just begins seeking release in more and more exotic places, strange places, on a bus, and a cored out apple, a piece of liver, as the famous example is. And he seems completely fixed in this. He seems stuck in a sort of Freudian loop, unable to really properly mediate between the id and the superego. And I'll do the Freudian reading in a bit. There's nothing subtle about the main theme of the book. There's nothing subtle about, as I've said, the Freudian appreciation of the book. And in a certain sense, the one thing that is subtle about the book is that as it's being written in 1969, it is a read between the lines commentary, we could say, on the sexual revolution. And in my opinion, and I'll probably get to this if I bring in someone like Wilhelm Reich, the actual inherent failure of the sexual revolution with regards the super ego type guilt. There is also, and this is probably for me one of the as someone in Britain and in rural Britain where we just do not have such culture around us, as opposed to New York, as my understanding is, there's lots of there is a sort of secondary narrative on the notion of the assimilation of American Jews into America, the relationship with Israel, and Jewish family life. That comes across very, very well, and it makes it kind of, again, transparently clear what such a constipated, and I'll get to why I meant that word, but constipated, tense, and neurotic life does look like. It is completely of its time, but as a time capsule, it's sewn together so well that you get just such a brilliant feeling of the time. So if I had to describe it in one word, it's neurotic. It is fantastically and wonderfully and almost excitably neurotic. It's reveling. The book itself, Roth is reveling in symptom. But and again, if you don't like explicitness, this really is the time to turn off. To go into the infamous, sort of one of the more infamous chapters, and this begins even at begins very quickly, chapter 2, page 17 of a 270 or so page book. And this is the sort of language that we see throughout the book, and the sort of humor that we see, the sort of transparency and honesty that we see, that at first feels juvenile, feels crass, but then as we get to know Alexander in a deeper sense, we realize there may be something more behind this, but we can't prod it too much because it's so absurd, as you will see. This is from a chapter called Whacking Off. Then came adolescence. Half my waking life spent locked behind the bathroom door, firing my wad down the toilet bowl, or into the soiled clothes in the laundry hamper, or splat up against the medicine chest mirror, before which I stood in my drop drawers so I could see how it looked coming out. Or else I was doubled over, my flying fist, eyes pressed closed but mouth wide open, to take that sticky sauce of buttermilk and Clorox on my own tongue and teeth. Though not infrequently, in my blindness and ecstasy, I got it all in the pompadour, like a blast of wild root cream oil. Through a world of matted handkerchiefs and crumpled Kleenex and stained pajamas, I moved my raw and swollen penis, perpetually in dread that my loathsomeness would be discovered by someone stealing upon me just as I was in the frenzy of dropping my load. Nevertheless, I was wholly incapable of keeping my paws from my dong once it started to climb up my belly. In the middle of a class, I would raise a hand to be excused, rush down the corridor to the lavatory, and with 10 or 15 savage strokes, beat off standing up into a urinal. At the Saturday afternoon movie, I would leave my friends to go off to the candy machine and wind up in a distant balcony seat, squirting my seed into the empty wrapper from a Mounds bar. On an outing of our family association, I once cored an apple, saw to my astonishment, and with the aid of my obsession, what it looked like, and ran off into the woods to fall upon the orifice of the fruit, pretending that the cool and mealy hole was actually between the legs of that mythical being who always called me Big Boy when she pleaded for what no girl in all recorded history had ever had. "Oh, shove it in me, Big Boy," cried the cored apple that I banged silly on that picnic. Big Boy, oh, give me all you've got," begged the empty milk bottle that I kept hidden in our storage bin in the basement, to drive wild after school with my Vaseline upright. "Come, Big Boy, come," screamed the maddened piece of liver that, in my own insanity, I bought one afternoon at a butcher shop and, believe it or not, violated behind a billboard on the way to a bar mitzvah lesson. So, this is the kind of thing we're dealing. It is hilarious. It made me laugh out loud the first time I was reading it in bed. I think, as a stylist, Roth's pacing, Roth's very modern style, his move in this, as original reviewers commented, away from someone like Henry James to really crass comedians of the era, Lenny Bruce being an example, and this running basically dialogue of just wanting to get this guilt out. So initially we are given basically something we just think, well, this is just crass and crude and sort of ridiculous smut basically, but framed within the device of being on the psychoanalyst's couch and feeling this sort of wanting to basically vomit out the crass, voyeuristic and exhibitionist masturbation sessions that Alexander has been undertaking, we begin to feel sort of ridiculous as readers to be caught in here and to be caught in this room having to listen to this. And we're both put in a place that should seemingly be vulnerable, which is, again, the psychoanalyst's couch. So we're listening in on something that should be entirely private. But instead of vulnerability, instead of maybe mourning or something along these lines, we are given something that is absolutely comedic, that is Jewishly comedic in the sense of a Jewish comedy, like Something's Gone Wrong, Woody Allen-esque. There's been a great era dealing with that form of neuroticism, and we can't help but sort of stand back, listen to it, and almost just smirk and laugh, as Alexander, also so transparent in his understanding of the whole idea, is with himself. He knows it's ridiculous, and he talks about it and just spiels off these examples, one of which he's having a fantasy about a woman that he's seeing on the street while beating off into a baseball catcher's mitt on the bus. And he goes through these examples, and he is so self-aware to the point of what we could say almost like an empirical self-awareness of the facts, of the data, of the situations. It's almost as if he's telling the novel himself to us, because he's like, look, you don't need to go into my unconscious. You don't need to go into my dreams. I know the problems and I'll tell you them. And there really is no respite. There's no place of rest in this novel because, again, Alexander just can't find a place of mediation, can't find a place of equilibrium. One of the best examples of that brings in all the elements, so key element being Alexander's masturbation addiction, his lust, basically, bringing in his lust, which is his own form of mediation, which is the ego, for the Freudian ego. And then, so there is a scene, let me explain the scene and then I'll give you my reading of it, if you will. There is a scene where Alexander Portnoy, our protagonist, as we now know, masturbates all the time. And he says that it got to the point where during dinner, he would feign and fake a stomachache so he could run off to the loo. And he would say, oh no, I've got diarrhea. So he'd run off to the loo pretending that he has diarrhea so that he could be off. But whilst he's in the loo, firing his wad, as he so beautifully says, or trying to, his mother, being a highly neurotic, hypochondriac Jewish mother, is banging on the door, telling him not to flush the diarrhea so that she can see it, like what kind of illness he might have. All the while, his father, who is deeply constipated, who at one point says the only way, basically to paraphrase, the only way he could clear out his bowels is either with a hand grenade or a nuclear bomb, is sort of saying that, like, oh boy, I wish that was me. So you have this insanely, absurdly neurotic nuclear family of a masturbation addicted boy pretending he has diarrhea so he can get away with the dinner and quickly beat one out, while his mother wants to see the diarrhea to prove for some reason, some hypochondriac reason, with his father actually having a jealousy of the false freedom that Alexander is undertaking at that point in time, being the release. So this is a novel, strangely, of releases, because we could say that the superego is blocked up, and the superego. So the way I see it is, I'm not sure. So we have this idea of the superego being the social hierarchy, the norms, the rules, the laws, often seen as the top-down authoritarian father. That's the superego for Freud. And then we have the id, which is our sort of animalistic, base desires, fucking, eating, things along these lines that we just want to do right now. And then we have the ego, which is the mediation between the two that allows us to basically partake in society with some form of equilibrium. I don't really. I think the ego, this whole idea of Alexander saying, let's put the id back in the id, and trying to own his symptom of masturbation addiction, it doesn't work. The release is not there for him because everything else is sort of blocked up. And so we have what's happened is we could see that the father symbolically has been completely clogged up. Like literally can't crap. He can't let anything out. He can't release anything. So the id is so blocked up that it seems to have been usurped by the mother, who has become the superego of the father is blocked up. So that form of traditional top-down hierarchical paternal law giving is so blocked up, it can't find any release. There's nothing that really, it's like a stodge that nothing can be done with it. And the father is, in that sense, has been sort of rendered impotent by the neurotic mother, who was overtaken and usurped the role as the superego. And all the while, what's strange is that Alexander's undertakings, his id type undertakings, in their transparency as the id, as this, like, I'm just going to go jerk off and write, they just don't work anymore because there's no place of balance. And one of the reasons for this, I think, is that Alexander already has a secondary problem, which is actually with the ego that he's been handed. It's with the worldview that he's been handed. Beneath all of this that's going on in the novel is, for him, a distrust and a guilt of living up to the societal standards that have been handed to him by this very traditional Jewish nuclear family that he just can't live up to. For instance, this is from 248. It should be 248. About, maybe not, I've lost the page. sorry, there's 245 about the everyday ego society that he is both fearful of but jealous of, as we see here. Because I love those men. I want to grow up to be one of those men. To be going home to Sunday dinner at 1 o'clock, sweat socks pungent from 21 innings of softball, underwear aesthetically gammy, and in the muscle of my throwing arm a faint throbbing from the low and beautiful pegs I've been unleashing all morning, long to hold down the opposition on the base paths. Yes, hair dishevelled, teeth gritty, feet beat, and kishkas sore from laughing, in other words, feeling great. A robust Jewish man now gloriously pooped. Yes, home I head for resuscitation. And to whom? To my wife and my children, to a family of my own. And right there, in the Weekark section, I shave and shower, rivulets of water stream off my scalp, a filthy brown. Ah, it's good. Ah, yes, it's a regular pleasure, standing there, nearly scalding myself to death with hot water. It strikes me as so manly, converting pain to pleasure. Then into a pair of snappy slacks and a freshly dry-cleaned gaucho shirt. Perfecto. I whistle a popular song, I admire my biceps, I shoot a rag across my shoes, making it pop. And meanwhile, my kids are rifling through the Sunday papers, reading with eyes the exact color of my own, giggling away on the living room rug. And my wife, Mrs. Alexander Portnoy, is setting the table in the dining room. We will be having my mother and father as guests. They will be walking over any minute, as they do every Sunday. A future, see? A simple and satisfying future. Exhausting, exhilarating softball in which to spend my body's force. But for the morning, then in the afternoon, the brimming hearty stew of family life, and at night 3 solid hours of the best lineup of radio entertainment in the world. Yes, as I delighted in Jack Benny's trips down to his vault in the company of my father, and Fred Allen's conversations with Mrs. Nussbaum and Phil Harris, with Frank Remley. Also shall my children delight in them with me. And so unto the 100th generation. And then after Kenny Baker, I double lock the front and back doors, turn off all the lights, check, and, as my father does, double check the pilot on the gas range so that our lives will not be stolen from us in the night. I kiss goodnight my pretty, sleepy daughter and my clever, sleepy son, and in the arms of Mrs. A. Portnoy, that kind and gentle, and in my sugary but modest fantasy, faceless woman, I bank the fires of my abounding pleasure. In the morning, I'm off to downtown Newark, to the Essex County Courthouse, where I spend my workdays seeking justice for the poor and the oppressed. And so this right near the end of the novel, he's suddenly divulging what is just a transparently ridiculous fantasy about this perfect Jewish life that he wants, that's followed on from his father's, so he can please his mother and father, so that he can basically develop some sort of ego. But his idea of the ego is a complete fantasy. And when his identity is wrestling with what he wants to do, which is the failed release of the id via his masturbatory habits, or the attempt at an actual mediation of an ego, he has nothing. He has nothing on either of them, because he doesn't the choice between his family's expectations and the freedom is caught on a veil. There is no depth to either of these, and they're both caught within the exact same sort of identity that's been formed from him, which is really nothing at all. It's an identity of neuroticism, and he has no experience of the world, because everything's just been a copy, an image that's on the surface, and has just been related to a very quick, basically, beat-off. And he develops from that what we could just read between the lines, even though he's pretending for some optimism, and actually a very pessimistic vision going forward of what he even expects. And so his id has failed because he never truly gets a release, and his ego doesn't actually mediate between anything. And all of this is within what we could say is a completely failed ego. That's the whole thing. And maybe that's what a good psychoanalyst, would finally get to. But really what his identity has become, and we see this very, very early on in page 33, when he says this: "Doctor, do you understand what I was up against? My wang was all I really had that I could call my own. You should have watched her at work during polio seasons. She should have gotten medals from the March of Dimes. Open your mouth. Why is your throat red? Do you have a headache you're not telling me about? You're not going to any baseball game, Alex, until I see you move your neck. Is your neck stiff? Then why are you moving it that way? You ate like you were nauseous. Are you nauseous? Well, you ate like you were nauseous. I don't want you drinking from the drinking fountain in that playground. If you're thirsty, wait until you're home. Your throat is sore, isn't it? I can tell how you're swallowing. I think maybe what you are going to do, Mr. Joe DiMaggio, is put that glove away and lie down. I'm not going to allow you to go outside in this heat and run around. Not with that sore throat. I'm not. I want to take your temperature. I don't like the sound of this throat business one bit. To be frank, I'm actually beside myself that you have been walking around all day with a sore throat and not telling your mother. Why did you keep this a secret? Alex, polio doesn't know from baseball games. It only knows from iron lungs and crippled forever. I don't want you running around, and that's final. Or eating hamburgers out. Or mayonnaise. Or chopped liver. Or tuna. Not everybody is careful the way your mother is about spoilage. You're used to a spotless house. You don't begin to know what goes on in restaurants. Do you know why your mother, when we go to the Chinks, will never sit facing the kitchen? Because I don't want to see what goes on back there. Alex, you must wash everything. Is that clear? Everything. God only knows who touched it before you did. And so it's interesting that in a paragraph or about a whole page that really is about his mother's neurotic nature regarding hypochondria and keeping him safe and being an overbearing protective mother that has become the superego force in his life, that he doesn't notice that he begins that with a reference to his dick. He says, my wang was all I really had that I could call my own. So his identity has become entirely fantastical. His literal identity is masturbatory. And so what Roth brings to the surface is quite a literal representation of the sort of pictures that many people in a Freudian sense are running when they view women, or when they view men, or when they view certain relationships, or when they view certain societal structures. They're really masturbating, but mentally. And Roth is flipping this and bringing it to the surface, and he's showing you, like, no, this guy's literal identity is masturbatory, and he's putting it completely on the surface, and in a sense deflating the psychoanalytical possibilities by saying, look, the symptoms are right here. They know it. Freud gets mentioned. The Oedipal complex gets explicitly mentioned, as if everyone knows the joke here. And the secondary joke, of course, then, is that this being a reflection of the sexual revolution, and this is something that Wilhelm Reich, a follower of Freud's, so I think Reich's really important, especially for Portnoy. So very briefly, very briefly, Freud's only real venture into explicitly sexual theory, like explicitly as in sex, as in masturbation, and very light touching on the orgasm theory, was basically to say, well, no, my patients' sex lives don't really come into it because they all have them, like they have sex lives. But what Reich did, Wilhelm Reich looked into the sex lives and realized, well, yeah, they have sex lives, but this guy can't come, and this guy comes too much, and this woman's never had an orgasm, and this woman, like, is, I don't know, crying during sex or whatever it might be. They all have these huge issues. And from this, Reich develops an orgasm theory, which is very key to Portnoy's complaint. And the orgasm theory is 4 stages, with Reich saying that the 4th is the most important, but we don't really think about it that way. So there's sort of the first stage is a sexual initiation, like we see what's happening here. Then the second is, we'd say, like sexual friction, the foreplay, the build up. And then the third stage is actually the actual orgasm. The 4th stage, which for Reich was the most important, was like the sigh, the release, the afterwards, and a dissipation, a release of bodily tensions that were held. So for Wilhelm Reich, the importance of the orgasm, the importance in the sense, in that way, masturbation or sex, or of the orgasm in general, or the whole orgasmic function, wasn't the great feeling of an orgasm, but was the dissipation of felt tension and what he would call armoring. And so to take this to the sexual revolution, which is happening late 50s, 60s, through to the early 70s, and Reich writes about this in his book on the sexual revolution, is that it might seem, and Roth is completely in line with this, by the way, and that's why I'm bringing this in, it might seem at the time that the sexual revolution was a success because, and it might seem now that the sexual revolution somehow won and worked out, but what really developed from the sexual revolution is empirically and socially and politically, it's like it's okay to now do this and jerk off all the time and be open about jerking off and fuck who you want and all this stuff. Right? It's all there and it's all like quantified. See, we've now passed that law, so we've removed that law and we're all talking about it and we're all doing it. But behind closed doors, behind closed doors, what isn't happening is actually the sexual revolution was all about stage 3 of this orgasm theory, but and it in a sense it worsened stage 4 because you just ended up doing it without realizing that no release is happening. There's one of the key things that Reich would say is that when people think Reich is this great, basically like a Kuma, like someone who just wanted to jerk off all the time. Reich would say, well, actually, no. If you have to do it all the time, clearly something isn't being released. And this is exactly what we see. In a sense, you could do a full Reichian reading of this, which is, why is it that Alexander Portnoy has to masturbate all the time? What is it that is not getting that release? Basically, my theory would be that his Freudian trifecta of id, ego, superego is all mixed up, and he just doesn't have an equalizing force that allows him, because the possible valve to release anything is just doesn't work. It's too much of a it's been ruined, and he transparently knows that. And all the other functions have also been messed around with his father becoming constipated and also not released. It's a novel of release, too much release, too little release, once again. But as this is all raised out of the unconscious onto the surface, we sort of have nowhere to go with it. And that in itself is a critique of the sexual revolution, that let's raise all this up to the surface and you can all look at it and you can all do it. Well, now what we just don't have any apparatus to deal with it. And so the book is this, over and over and over again, filled with comedic genius, filled with lurid, crass, vulgar language, very brazen, very funny, really actually not that cynical. I think that Roth is entirely sincere about Portnoy's issues. There's probably a lot of Roth in Portnoy. I believe there is. Roth. This is my first Roth, but I believe Roth puts a lot of himself into the characters and the situations that he's writing. It certainly won't be my last Roth, but there is a sincerity. And I'm not saying there's going to be these moments that are going to make you weep or anything like that. There isn't any interjections of romance or really love or anything soft or vulnerable like that. Just isn't. It's this horrific cycle of a failed id and a failed Freudian problem that ends fantastically, in my opinion. And this isn't really a spoiler, but it ends really with the ultimate modern Jewish humor adjacent modern punchline, literally in a one sentence chapter, we could say, called Punchline. So, said the doctor, now we may perhaps to begin? Yes? So we have almost 300 pages of Portnoy building and building and building and building, and not having a release. And go, and thinking that he's dealing with everything, thinking there's this great transparency, thinking that he knows, thinking that, I'll bring all the brazen, bring the unconscious up, throw everything at you in the most explicit terms. And so the book is his release. The book is one massive jerk off to finally, for the doctor to say, right, now we can begin, because you've cleared your pipes. Maybe I'm just juvenile for enjoying it as much as I did, but it's very easy read. It's extremely funny. The reviews are actually quite split on it when you look online. But I think for anyone, I'm not going to say it's a light read. I do, if I want to do criticisms, I think 50 pages could have been removed. That would be about it. But for anyone who wants a humorous, I don't want to say a light read, but it's lighter than most of the stuff I do on the channel. It's very easy to read and it's very fun to read. Anyone who wants something like that, it's kind of like a great time to read it. I'd read it if you going to choose a place, sat in a city, sat on a bus, somewhere you can see people bustling around, I think would be great. It's not for the faint-hearted, but it's just funny. And I don't think we move too far beyond the criticisms that Roth is making about the sexual revolution in there either. So yeah, extremely fast pace, filled to the brim with funny anecdotes, guilt, shame, criticisms of modern family life, hypochondria, and what it is to know where to look to get a release. But it's just plain fun and funny. And if there's any Roth fans out there, I'd love to be recommended the next Roth to read. But that is my review of Philip Roth's Portnoy's Complaint. Thank you very much.